Now, for more on the situation in Afghanistan, let's go back to Kathy Gannon in Kabul. Kathy, let's start with Kabul airport. Is the resumption of flights a good sign for the country's urgently needed logistical channel?
Yes, I mean, I think it is a very good sign, actually. Domestic flights actually started a few days earlier. There have been a number of international assistance flights that have come in. Qatar has brought in, UAE has brought in, Pakistan. But yesterday, most notably, was the first international passenger flight out of Afghanistan. And on that flight were Americans, Canadians, Germans, some British citizens. So I think the fact that the airport is almost up and running to allow for international flights is a good sign. They say the airport is about 90% ready to take international flights on a regular basis into Kabul. The Qatar special envoy, Al-Qahtani, he did say yesterday that this was a good sign as far as the country going, returning a little bit toward normal. And also, I think the desperately needed aid. The United Nations has been very, very clear that Afghanistan really is desperate for assistance, for food, for medicine, for just about everything. It's dependent on the international community.
And Kathy, let me refer you to remarks from the UN envoy to Afghanistan, Deborah Lyons. She's warning of a dire situation facing almost the entire population there. Take a listen.
There is an immediate and pressing need to deliver on a huge scale essential humanitarian aid in areas such as health, food security, non-food items, and sanitation. Billions of assets and donor funds have been frozen by members of the international community. The understandable purpose is to deny these funds to the de facto Taliban administration. The inevitable effect, however, will be a severe economic downturn that could throw many more millions into poverty and hunger.
Kathy, have you sensed this kind of urgency in Afghanistan recently, and has the Taliban administration mentioned any plans to deal with this challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the people at the airport yesterday was, excuse me, Zabiullah Mujahid, who is the Deputy Information Minister. And he said Afghanistan is desperate. It needs to have this international assistance. Regardless of what the international community might think of the Taliban's new cabinet, the leadership, people are desperate. I mean, even before the Taliban takeover on August 15th, the poverty level in Afghanistan was nearly 60%. That means that 60% of the population was living on less than $2 a day. The mass evacuation as well has removed a lot of health workers, educationists, young people who were actually doing work in the communities. So there's a real desperate need among ordinary Afghans, and the emergency flights are starting to ramp up, but as Deborah Lyons said quite accurately, is that the need is tremendous. Also just to run the country, to start the ministries again, to start the government again. People have been asked to come to work, but I was talking to somebody at the airport yesterday, and he said, you know, I'm here, and he had been 10 years working at the airport. He said, but I'm not getting paid. So, you know, there has to be salaries paid. There has to be just the simple things like paper and pens and to get the passport office up and running. So the need is really quite tremendous. And the banks, you know, people are lined up 2 and 3 deep, hundreds waiting for the bank to open, to get a little bit of money, to get the money that they've had in their bank accounts. For some of them, it's their life savings. So yes, the need is quite enormous.
Kathy, we know winter is coming for Afghanistan, and meanwhile some Western countries are threatening to cut aid to the country. So can people cope without international aid, especially food and fuel, to get through winter?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question, and you're quite right that the winter is coming. The situation is desperate for many Afghans, you know, and if you go into the villages and into the rural areas, it gets increasingly worse. A lot of people have come into the city. There's a lot of displaced people living in Kabul that were displaced by fighting, were displaced by the drought, just displaced by poverty, coming into the city looking for work. So you have a city of over 6 million. You still have people living in the park, out in the open, without any shelter. You have camps that have been set up for really quite literally years, where you have displaced people from drought, from fighting during the last 20 years. So the situation is desperate for all of those people in all of those circumstances. And as you quite rightly point out, winter is coming, and with lack of shelter and lack of assistance, it really bodes very poor for people here in Afghanistan.